Noon is it's both presentations and discussion. New perspectives on NC Wyeth and narrative art, from illustrations to murals. And we're in a marvelous place to have this discussion, given Heritage's engagement with illustration and with American art and the questions that that prompts. I'm delighted that Amanda Burden from the Brandywine Museum is here. And with her is conservator, Kristen de Cataldi. Thank you. And from the Illustrated Gallery, Laura Palucha. And short bios are in each of your brochures. So we have represented three very different perspectives about something that is becoming a more and more critical question, as looking at any current catalog will tell you. So we are in the best hands possible, and Amanda and I are co-conspirators from way back.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think I say this each time I speak. I used to come to this conference as a graduate student. And so I'm very pleased to be speaking again and to have picked a couple of colleagues to come with me to kind of tell the story of an artist and a style of art that has been out of fashion, and his attempts to move into another style of art, which may not have been any more successful in going to murals in the 1930s. But I was listening earlier today, and when Lowry said that that if the fine arts were kind of the dark side and crafts were the moral center of the art world, I'm here, and I think we're here to talk about what might be the dirty money side of it all, because it's illustration. It's things that are done for clients and murals as well, things that are taking place in a time period when keeping yourself financially afloat was very important. And it was difficult to leave a very well-paying illustration job and take on the risks of something new like easel painting or getting into the Corcoran or making murals. And so my job here today is to shepherd us through this story through the lens of one artist, NC Wyeth. And we're going to start out by hearing a little bit about the market for illustration and how it's been sort of that second-class citizen, but how that is changing these days. Then we'll tell you a little bit about that transition between illustration and mural making. And then Kristen will come and take over and talk about one specific mural that she worked on conserving. And all of this we think of as a prelude to what we'll hear tomorrow when we hear about more WPA artists and the murals that are currently imperiled and maybe needing some conservation help. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and then we'll go on down the line.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so I'm Laura Palucha. I'm the director of the Illustrated Gallery based in Ambler, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. I heard some plugs earlier today. Philadelphia is a short train ride away, so if you ever like to visit our gallery. I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, so I'm Laura Palucha, director from the Illustrated Gallery based in Ambler, Pennsylvania, just outside Philadelphia. So short ride away. I encourage you all to come visit our gallery if you like what you see today and want to talk more about illustration. We're open by appointment. Okay, so the title of my talk today is The Revaluation of Golden Age Illustration. In February of this year, the Art Institute of Chicago announced the acquisition of Norman Rockwell's The Dugout, an iconic image featuring the Chicago Cubs that appeared on a 1948 cover for the Saturday Evening Post. A gift from the former Illinois governor Bruce Rauner and his wife Diana, the announcement made national headlines. The painting now hangs prominently in the Arts of the Americas Gallery, directly adjacent to Grant Wood's American Gothic and not far from Edward Hopper's Nighthawks. Significantly, this is the first Norman Rockwell painting to enter the Art Institute's permanent collection. However, the widespread news coverage of the acquisition largely downplayed one very significant fact. The work acquired by the Art Institute is a preparatory oil study. Rockwell's final version of the dugout is in the Illustrated Gallery's collection. A rare example of a Rockwell pose cover executed in gouache and watercolor. It's a true masterpiece and really is the star of our collection. But the Art Institute's prominent placement of a Rockwell study and that the acquisition generated national attention signals something very important. Golden Age illustrators have arrived. Illustration art is being recognized as a serious and significant American art form. However, most major art museums simply haven't actively collected illustration as a category, and many may now find themselves priced out of the market. The deeper reason is historical. For much of the 20th century, illustration art was written off by the art establishment as too sentimental, too commercial, or kitsch. The influential art critic Clement Greenberg, who championed the avant-garde, was emphatic in his rejection of Rockwell. "You have to put Rockwell down," he wrote, "down below the rank of minor artist. He chose not to be serious." But Rockwell was incredibly skilled, and as evidenced in his 1962 post cover, The Connoisseur, he could paint a successful abstract composition. But Greenberg's bias had a certain logic to it. Illustration art, broadly defined, is artwork produced for publication or mass reproduction. Its ties to commerce and its popular appeal placed it outside the traditional boundaries of the fine art world. And commissioned work came with constraints, specific stories to tell, editorial preferences to satisfy, and deadlines. The assumption was that art made for hire, made for reproduction, or made for the masses couldn't possibly be great art. And illustrators themselves sometimes struggled with their relationship to their commercial work. N.C. Wyeth resented his illustration work, feeling it kept him from more serious fine art projects. I'm sure Amanda will be exploring this more deeply in her presentation. But Rockwell took a different view. He wore the title of illustrator without apology. And in his 1960 autobiography, he wrote, "Some people have been kind enough to call me a fine artist. I've always called myself an illustrator. I'm not sure what the difference is. All I know is that whatever type of work I do, I try to give it my best." But that's not to say he was immune to the pressures of the field. "Meeting deadlines and thinking up ideas are the scourges of an illustrator's life," he once said. His 1938 post cover Blank Canvas, or Deadline, illustrates this struggle. There was also a practical consequence of the field's lower status. The original paintings often weren't considered important in their own right. The final product was the printed page, not the physical artwork behind it. And originals were often given away by artists as gifts or simply tossed aside. And unless an illustrator negotiated the return of the original artwork as part of their contract, as some artists like Rockwell did, the originals would remain with the publisher, where they might be gifted to employees, discarded, relegated to storage, often forgotten for decades. This N.C. Wyeth mural shown here, The Christmas Ship in Old New York, is from the Illustrated Gallery's collection. And it's a good example of how a masterpiece could be neglected. Painted in 1928 as a promotional illustration for the Interwoven Stocking Company, the painting was discovered in a garage in 2012 in serious disrepair. It took nearly 5 months of intensive restoration work to return it to the condition you see today on the right. Actually, let me go back for a second. That a painting of this quality by one of America's great painters ended up stored in a garage is not necessarily an anomaly. It's quite typical of how illustration art was treated for much of the 20th century. And in recent years, Golden Age illustrators have undergone a significant critical and market reassessment. Rising prices and auction results that make national headlines are a clear signal. They reflect not just collector enthusiasm, but a broader cultural recognition that illustration art matters. And what's fascinating is that the very qualities that once relegated illustration to the sidelines of the fine art world are precisely what make it so compelling today. Illustration art is, by its nature, meant to grab attention. Cover artwork had to stand out on crowded newsstands and catch the eyes of passersby in an instant. Printed advertisements had to jump off the page and cut through the clutter. So illustrations are designed to be relatable, approachable, and immediate. You don't need historical context or critical vocabulary to appreciate a great illustration. It really stands on its own. And in our current era of shortened attention spans and endless scrolling, that quality is really incredibly relevant today. An image that encapsulates a complete narrative into a single frame is a really powerful thing, and these illustrators were doing that a century ago. Golden Age illustration has garnered more appreciation over the past decade or so. Often, what draws collectors to the work is nostalgia. These illustrations evoke a yearning for life's simple pleasures and a celebration of the beauty of ordinary, everyday existence. And that sentiment has real market power. That's especially true for covers of the Saturday Evening Post. In December 2013, Rockwell's Post cover Saying Grace led Sotheby's American art sale, fetching $46 million, more than doubling the previous record of $15 million, which was set in 2006 for another Post cover, Breaking Home Ties, seen there on the right. His second highest result today is The Rookie, a Post cover that sold in 2014 for just over $22.5 million. These figures show that Golden Age illustrators can compete at the very top of the American art market. Last November, Rockwell's So You Want to See the President sold through Heritage to the White House Historical Association for $7.25 million, setting a new record for a Rockwell work on paper and accounting for nearly half of the entire American art sales, $14.76 million total on its own. And this was the highest price achieved for a Rockwell since 2018. Viva, I don't know if you're, but yay, congrats. Another shout out for Aviva coming up. So J.C. Leindecker's market has also risen. In 2021, his Post cover Beat Up Boy Football Hero sold through Heritage for $4.12 million, the first and only Leindecker to ever cross the $1 million mark at auction, and a figure that shattered the previous record of just over $516,000 set in 2020 for the Post cover Carousel Ride. His current number 2 top result is the Post cover First Long Suit, which sold for $615,000 at Heritage in 2022. That painting's now part of the Illustrated Gallery's collection. Wyeth's record was set in 2018 with Portrait of a Farmer at just over $5.9 million at Sotheby's, and this surpassed the previous record of around $4.9 million, set just 2 years earlier for Hands Up from the Story of Montana. The number 3 record was set in 2020 for the mural Indian Love Call for $3.5 million. These individual records reflect a broader, sustained shift in the market. These charts show the average auction prices per year for Rockwell, Wyeth, and Leindecker from 1989 through May 4th, 2026, which is when I pulled this Ask Art data. So Rockwell is considered an established blue chip artist at this point. His average sale price is regularly in the $400,000 to $700,000 range since his 2013 price spike, and his sell-through rates average about 85%. And Wyeth, while he's a very highly regarded name in Golden Age illustration, he doesn't generally command the prices of Rockwell, but he's still very validated in the market. Since 2012, his average prices have consistently remained above $100,000. And the volume of the Wyeths coming to market is a bit thinner, so average sales prices tend to be more sensitive to the quality of the specific works that are coming to market in a given year. So a major lot can really swing these averages significantly. Leindecker tells the most compelling growth story of the 3, with an average sell-through rate of 91% from 2015 to 2026. Average prices crossed $100,000 around 2017 and have held there. So this revaluation of Leindecker, I think, is still ongoing. There's still a lot of potential there. But what we're seeing right now isn't just a market moment, but a cultural moment as well. Museums are playing a direct role in a cultural shift, bringing scholarly attention to illustration art and presenting it as a powerful art form that both chronicles and constructs American identity and culture. In 2023, the New York Historical Society mounted Undercover, J.C. Leyendecker and American Masculinity. The exhibition framed Leyendecker as a pivotal gay artist whose work, produced for mainstream audiences, contained coded homoerotic undertones. And Undercover also examined how Leyendecker's illustrations helped establish an American ideal of white male beauty in the early 20th century. The exhibition raised his profile and provided a new critical lens through which to appreciate his work. Those drawn to Leyendecker often comment on how modern his images feel. One of my favorite paintings in our gallery's collection shown here is The Oarsman. It's a 1916 Collier's cover. See, even I think it's later than it is. 1916 Collier's cover. At a recent art fair, it was by far the most discussed painting in our booth, and multiple visitors independently came up to me and said the same thing. This aesthetic reminded them of Abercrombie and Fitch catalogs from the 1990s and early 2000s. It feels more modern than it is. So this kind of immediate connection and resonance across a century is really what makes this artwork so appealing. Prominent collectors also shape the market and help to raise the profile of illustration art overall. Film directors Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are among the most famous collectors of the genre. In 2010, the Smithsonian American Art Museum mounted Telling Stories, showcasing 57 major Rockwell works from their private collections, and connecting Rockwell's staging of a scene to the cinematic devices that influenced how these directors approached filmmaking. Which brings us to the biggest institutional moment this category has seen. On September 22nd of this year, the much anticipated Lucas Museum of Narrative Art opens in Los Angeles. Co-founded by George Lucas and Melody Hobson, the museum displays will draw from holdings of more than 40,000 objects across 30 galleries. The galleries will largely be organized thematically, but they'll also have dedicated rooms for Golden Age illustrators like Wyeth, Rockwell, Maxfield Parrish, and Jesse Wilcox Smith. Lucas has called his museum a temple to the people's art. The breadth and ambition of the museum sends an unambiguous message. Narrative art and illustration are worthy of serious attention. In the words of Lucas, narrative art tells the story of a society, what the common beliefs are that hold it together. The opening of the Lucas Museum and the national attention it has already generated, even before its opening, makes 2026 a significant milestone year for illustration art. The work that was once dismissed as too commercial, sentimental, and unserious is now hanging in the Art Institute of Chicago, selling for millions of dollars at the world's major auction houses, and being enshrined in a major new dedicated museum. I'm proud that the Illustrated Gallery has been part of this story, collecting, championing, and preserving this work for the past several years. One more plug, we'll be showcasing at the American Art Fair this weekend, or the first floor of the show. Please do stop by if you make it over there. All right. Thank you.
And Laura, could you click that one more? I think I put one more slide on yours. Fantastic. If you have not been to the Illustrated Gallery, it is kind of breathtaking to go through this building and see all these ages and stages of American illustration too. It's not just the Golden Age. It's things all the way up through the 20th century. And so it's pretty stunning to look at. All right, so I'm going to switch our focus more towards N.C. Wyeth, one of the illustrators that is receiving a dedicated gallery at that Lucas Museum. And we are seeing more and more interest in him at my institution, which is the Brandywine Museum of Art, where we steward the work of all members of the Wyeth family, and different members take center stage at different times. One of the recent developments that's drawn more attention to NC Wyeth, we're doing a lot of documentaries recently, including one for the Lucas Museum, is the fact that we now have the Wyeth, the NC Wyeth correspondence collection of Betsy James Wyeth. It is thousands of letters that have been collected and archival material and documents that catalogs and chronicles NC Wyeth's career. And on top of that, we have just received a major material culture collection. As an illustrator, his works appeared on things like lamps and signs and advertisements. And we've just received 27 pallets of those objects. And so we'll be digging in soon. And since Laura showed showed the new Lucas Museum, I thought I'd also remind folks what was in the news last week. If you didn't see a Philadelphia paper, you might not have seen it, but the Brandywine announced our expansion coming in the fall of 2029. We're building a new building with 60,000 square feet of gallery space. There will be dedicated Wyeth galleries there, as you can imagine, as well. And so we are growing. The reputation of illustration is growing. The reputation of all of American art is growing, but we're happy to be, I don't know if we'd call us the East Coast Lucas Museum though, but we do enjoy explaining the history, especially of this guy, NC Wyeth. I'm gonna run through just a little quick get up to speed on where he was when he started to think that murals might be his path forward. So NC Wyeth was a student of Howard Pyle, the godfather of American illustration, who had his own school in Wilmington, Delaware. Wyeth had been, some of his friends from Boston, from art school, were going to be going there. He didn't have a great desire growing up to be an illustrator, but this school, this place to learn how to do it from the man who was the most successful illustrator in the country, was a remarkable opportunity. We heard earlier this morning how many American artists are self-taught in a way, and illustrators certainly were until Howard Pyle started this dedicated school. I'm showing you here in his Western wear because if you went to Howard Pyle School, you kind of had to choose a major in terms of your subject matter that you would continue to immerse yourself in. Some folks chose historical scenes, the American Revolution. Clifford Ashley chose the whaling world. He's from New Bedford. Why wouldn't he? NC Wyeth of Needham, Massachusetts chose the American West. So I'm looking at you, Andrew, because I'm thinking really strongly about NC Wyeth's relationship to the West and some of the themes you brought up today. Here he is just before leaving for his Western sojourn, and then his stop in Denver to get all the souvenirs, including the buffalo chaps and the Stetson hat, which we still have today in our collections. So he goes out west, and it turns out he is very successful at this sort of illustration even before he's been to the West. You see here his very first Saturday Evening Post cover in 1903, based on the painting on the left, and then on 1906, his Bronco Buster, which is really big and at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. But at the same time, he is doubting already whether this is his way forward. In fact, this is on the right is a cream of wheat ad, in fact. And Howard Pyle made a very pointed criticism, not naming names, but saying if you were going to work in advertising, you really should do it for a reputable and notable company like the DuPont company or Mazda Edison light bulbs. That's who Maxfield Parrish was working for, and not a breakfast cereal company, right at the same time that NC Wyeth is doing cream of wheat. So we kind of know where that was directed, but he is, I think, very happy to be working at this stage in his career. He's a newly married and has kids coming in on the way. But it was not until 1911 when he really hit his stride by creating a partnership with Charles Scribner's and Sons, who were going to be issuing Scribner's Illustrated Classics. And the first of those was Treasure Island. Now, Howard Pyle would have been the go-to pirate illustrator of the day, but he had moved to Florence. And so NC Wyeth was recommended by Edwin Austin Abbey. he'll come back around to us as a mural painter again later. This is one of the 17 works he did for Treasure Island, and it's the end papers. And let me just show you the fruits of his labor. I said I was going to talk about money here today. His advance for the Treasure Island set of 17 paintings was enough to help him purchase 18 acres of land in Chaddsford, Pennsylvania, and build a house, which you see on the left, and a studio, that's his rendering of it, on the right-hand side. So this was certainly a great enticement for him to be able to earn his way in the world through illustration. And since many of his letters, most of his letters are to his parents, he is constantly reassuring them that this thing that he has chosen to do is going to be able to sustain and support his family. So we see that throughout his letters all the time. But we also, I'll take you back to here to two images from Treasure Island, that we also see that he is doubting early on, probably not long after Howard Pyle made the serial comment. He said, he wrote to his mother in 1907, it has been absolutely evident to me the past 6 months of the uselessness of clinging to illustration and hoping to make it great art. He's convinced that it is a stepping stone to painting, so says Mr. Pyle, but I'm convinced that it is a stepping stone backwards as well, which will in time leave you in that most unsatisfactory position of, quote, a good illustrator, but he has done his best work. He continued on. I mean, of course, the financial aspect of it and the security of that job in the early 20th century is not something he was going to turn away from. So he went on to create many more Scribner's Illustrated classics, The Boy's King Arthur, The Mysterious Island. On the right-hand side is Robinson Crusoe that just was auctioned a couple of weeks ago. I have to consult with Laura, but at $533,000, that illustration is one of his highest illustration works. He kept doing this, but he also kept doubting. In 2015, so King Arthur is 1917, Mysterious Island is 1918, Robinson Crusoe is 1920, but he kept doubting. And in 1915, he wrote to his brother this time. He said, I don't want to be rated as an illustrator trying to paint, underscore, but as a painter who has shaken the dust of illustration off his heels. He is affected by this reputation of illustration, even as he's doing it and being very successful at it. And those sentiments are echoed over and over again in his letters. In 1920, and finished in 1921, he takes on his first, what I would say, major mural commission. He had done two earlier ones that were much more in the decorative mode, decorating a hotel, dining rooms and lobbies, and decorating a restaurant in Atlantic City, New Jersey. But here he is at the Missouri State Capitol building, which has some very fine murals by other artists, you may know, doing two battles from the American Civil War in 1920 and 21. And he does this in that small studio, the small studio that we saw pictured. These are 12 feet wide and installed very high up in the State House ceiling. And he is just getting used to the rhythm of mural works when he's making these. He got the commission on March 30th, 1920. He actually got the presentation paintings and the sketches approved on August 1st. And by December 3rd, he had shipped the paintings to Missouri. In January, he goes there to put the finishing touches on it. And he's, again, learning the pace of this. He writes to his mother, I arrived there in Jefferson City after an uneventful trip. Tuesday morning, January 4th, I got right to work on the borders, laying the gold and the painting and the color phase of the foremost design. The work was under difficulties of bad lighting and from the ladders I had to use. And because I became a little apprehensive that I had not allowed enough time to finish before the unveiling on Friday. So I worked until 2:30 the following morning. The next day, Wednesday, I started about 9:30 and I worked until midnight. And on Thursday until 3 the following morning. And on Friday till noon and just barely finished. There's also an account of a late night poker game in there as well. So it wasn't all work for NC Wyeth. But on the merits of these first murals, he began to get more mural commissions. This one you see now at the at what's called the Langham Hotel in Boston, but it's a pair that was originally for that building when it was the Federal Reserve of Boston. And I think I have the wrong date on there. That's 1922. 1922 is important because NC Wyeth has a bout of homesickness in 1921. And he decides that he is going to move back to his hometown of Needham, Massachusetts. He's giving up the Chadds Ford studio and the house. He's moving back to Needham. He's seeking out his childhood in many ways. He learns that Needham doesn't exist as it did in his childhood. But while he's there, because he's so close to Boston, he starts taking more Boston commissions. So there's this, and then there is also a set for the First National Bank of Boston, which comes the very next year. He eventually leaves. He realizes he is not going to, that Needham is not the same. He needs his space. I think living literally next door to his parents also was a little too close for quarters for him. But when he goes back, he decides to commit fully to mural painting, and he redesigns his studio in Chadds Ford. Wait, I keep clicking my, he redesigns his studio in Chadds Ford and builds that left-hand portion of it. You see the interior there specifically for mural painting. So he is going to take this seriously now. And he has this addition put on and begins to work right away on more Boston commissions. He ended up excavating part of the ground there so he could have a nice tall space inside. He added electricity so that he could use lanterns, projectors, magic lanterns to project his slides. And he built some interior spaces that would be very conducive to mural painting, including that scaffold, that rolling scaffold ladder that he has there. This on the right-hand side is a recent picture up on the top of that scaffold ladder. So you see just how big that space is. And he was going to use every square inch of it for these murals. There he is in 24 on the next mural commission in Boston. And I've noticed that he had a lot of photographs taken of himself working on these murals. So I think it's a point of pride. It was publicity, of course. It was promoting himself and his skill. We heard about the Battle of Trenton earlier this morning. So I just happened to have a Battle of Trenton, or Washington's reception in Trenton, which is another mural. You see the scale of it with him on the right-hand side. This is now at Thomas Jefferson Edison State College. I think it'll be coming up for sale soon, though. It was an agreement, and as we're going to hear later, it's very hard to maintain murals. These are difficult objects to keep and care and love. This brings me to maybe one of the highlights of his mural career. It is certainly his longest mural. It is 60 feet wide. It's called The Apotheosis of the Family, that was done for Wilmington Savings Fund Society, a bank in Wilmington, Delaware. You see him working on the central panel of it there in his studio. And then on the right-hand side, you see as it would have looked installed in the bank in 1932. So I want you to think about that for just a minute. Installing it in the bank in 1932 means we are in the depths of the Depression. And the bank is, in fact, looking for ways to re-encourage people to use their bank again. They had been there for 100 years. They were promising to be there for another 100 more. Now, while we're talking about money, these murals also were a step up in pay for NC Wyeth. That Missouri State Capitol was a $7,000 commission adjusted for inflation. That's $113,000 today. The mural for the William Penn painting, which you see there in the mural which is currently at Brandywine, was a contract for $12,000 in 1932, which is $285,000 today. And then he billed in 1926 when he worked for the National Geographic Society. He billed them by the square foot. So he was not shy about knowing what his work was worth and asking for that. I'm bringing you here to the color, recently restored, recently photographed color of this massive 60-foot wide mural, Apotheosis of the Family, from the bank, in full color this time. Now, you might think that this time period during the Depression is going to cause a turn down in his business, but N.C. Wyeth reports in his letters that the business depression has had no effect upon the market as far as I'm concerned as an illustrator. And his finances, encouraged him to do more murals. In fact, he wrote to his brother Stimson that he was in 1931, when he's doing studies for this mural, that he had, quote, weeded out the small stuff, i.e. illustration, that nothing but mural canvases will be touched from now until the middle of 1932. And he also wrote a letter around that same time saying he was only doing a small number of commissions or illustrations, concentrating on work with, quote, more potential. So this is not just more financial potential, I think, but for him, he was considering how he was going to be moving forward in the art world, that place he had always wanted to be in, but had always felt like as an illustrator, he was locked out of. So the story of the mural is vast. We offer a tour at Brandywine. I'm happy to talk to anybody else about it afterwards here. But where I want to end us with is realizing and remembering that in 1932, N.C. Wyeth's moves to mural were partly very personal and financially motivated, but also the world is turning to murals at this moment. The Mexican muralism movement is burgeoning in the 1920s. Rivera comes to New York in 1931 through 33 to work here. American regionalist murals are filling the country, and Benton's America's Today murals was 1920s, and then the Whitney mural is 30 and 31, exactly this time period. And of course, as we'll hear tomorrow, the WPA will be sort of born, the mural project will be born in 1935. And so he is putting himself into the mix of what he is seeing other artists who are stretching and reaching doing. This is the mural itself. If you visit the Brandywine and take a tour, we take you to the private property of Jamie Wyeth, where the mural is on display in a purpose-built building for it. And it's seen as a building built for one work of art. I would love to tell you more about how it got there, but that's exactly what Kristen is so great at. I do want to leave you with this preparation before we hear from Kristen, that this mural, as you know, Kristen's a conservator, had a history of conservation over the years since it was put up in 1932, 1953, 1976, 1998, and then you in 2022. And it's always been big news in our neck of the woods because it is a local mural that was on display until 2000, very early 2008, and then went away into storage. So the gap between going away into storage and coming out on view in that round barn is what I'm going to ask Kristen to fill us in on. There you go.
Yeah, I'll just take it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda. First of all, thank you so much to the IAC Organizing Committee for inviting me here. I think hats off to you all for successfully luring a painting conservator out of our studio. We tend to like to dwell behind our easels and just keep quiet and keep to ourselves, but I'm very privileged to be here today and talk about this project. My talk, so Amanda talked about money. I'm going to talk about oil paint and lots of lead white, specifically, a lot of it. So just a heads up, my talk will be a little bit technical, but there's a reception at the end, so we will get through this. As you all saw in her talk before this one, the apotheosis is quite large. It's about 20 feet high and 60 feet wide, but it is divided up into 5 sections. There's no way that NC would have been able to fit this in its entirety in his studio, as you just saw. So he painted it in 5 sections, and of course they're all different dimensions slightly, just to make it a little bit more challenging from a conservation perspective. But the seams are a little bit hard to make out, but there are 5 sections in total. So In order to provide some background on the recent treatment of the mural, we really have to go back in time to the moment that the mural was first installed in downtown Wilmington, Delaware, in the bank. NC recruited the services of the Wollheim brothers, who apparently were well known in New York City circles as professional mural hangers. Another Wollheim brother, some of you may or may not know of, is Louis Wollheim, which is pictured on the right. He was a renowned actor in his own right, and he was beloved. He was loved by both NC and Andrew Wyeth, as both of them loved the famous motion picture All Quiet on the Western Front, which is one of the pictures that Louis starred in. When the Wollheim brothers came and installed the mural in the bank, he had them all over to dinner, big raucous party, I'm sure, in Chadds Ford, where the brothers told NC that he reminded them of their brother, and he was purportedly really delighted by the comparison. So to adhere each of these 5 panels to the wall in the bank, the brothers first had to prime the surface of the wall, and you see on the right-hand side, that's just sort of a cross-sectional view of what the wall looked like at the time, and then on in the middle is a cross-sectional view of the each of the 5 sections of the mural. So you have pretty basic standard stratigraphy canvas, followed by a lead white containing oil ground, and then on top of that he applied his oil paint at the composition, the pictorial surface. They then used another layer of lead white oil paint, which was then followed by large sections of canvas. That is how they first primed the wall. I suspect a lot of murals in and around New York City that they mounted were done in this manner. And then another layer of lead white oil paint was applied to the back of the mural. After a period of time, the mural was then literally stuck onto the wall while that lead white was still tacky. I will tell you, not only is it a favored, wonderful paint for hundreds of years, but it is a great adhesive. You can stick a lot of things to it. It was then standard practice to also nail or otherwise attach the top of the canvas to the wall in order to provide more support while that lead white adhesive finished drying. And we found evidence of these holes along the top edge of the mural when we closely examined it, starting in 2022. So NC himself was involved with the final stages of the installation. We know this because he meticulously covered up each of those 4 seams with oil paint to allow the composition to read as one singular narrative. The brothers then addressed the unavoidable air bubbles that form between the painting and the wall by making very small, inconspicuous little slits in the canvas. While this may sound invasive, it was actually a very common technique that was used to minimize buckling and protruding air pockets, which would otherwise be noticeable and distracting when viewing the mural from below. And eventually, NC made the final decision to cover the outer edges of the composition with a gilded canvas frame, which caused him to ultimately reposition the signed date, as you can see in the bottom left. So he originally put the date below his signature, but then had to move it to the side because he wanted the whole composition to be framed. And that frame still exists today, actually. Amanda has already touched upon the mural's extensive restoration history. I'm not going to go into that, but in 2008, the building was sold to a real estate developer, prompting the immediate removal of the mural. We'll hear a lot about that sort of dialogue tomorrow, I'm sure. Initial testing seemed to indicate that the mural could be removed along the interface shown by that red line, using vertically oriented tubes to wrap each of the panels with the paint side facing out. When you roll paintings, please wrap them with the paint side facing out. There's a reason for this, and I will show you in a bit. Well, to go back to 2008 for a second, one often has grand ideas for installing and deinstalling these large murals. I can personally attest to this, and things they do not always go according to plan. So when that team began the actual work on the wall back in 2008, they found out that they could not remove the painting from the second canvas without causing extreme damage to the mural. That lead white adhesive that the Woolheim brothers used was so strong, it actually pulled away large amounts of wall lime plaster and bits of mortar from the wall substrate. This meant that the team was now dealing with a mural that weighed approximately 1,000 pounds, something that likely led them to end up using horizontally oriented tubes, as you can see in the bottom left. So here we are, first examining the panels, my husband and I, back in 2022. Unfortunately, it became clear that the diameter of the tubes that the deinstallation crew used in 08 were much too small. Compounding this was the fact that the canvas panels were rolled paint side face in, which resulted in the formation of hundreds of compression cracks across the entire width of each section. And so we're looking at, on the right-hand side, the back of the mural as it came off of the wall, rolled up. All that white material you see is the wall lime plaster and the mortar that I mentioned, and then the more beige areas are the exposed sections showing the lead white oil paint adhesive. I am happy to report that that lead white oil paint adhesive was completely cured. It was not friable, so we didn't have to deal with significant lead abatement issues, much like the, as opposed to the 2018. They were faced with huge lead abatement issues. We did encounter, though, in the initial phases, large amounts of dust and debris that remained from the deinstallation, which we had to deal with using PPE and all appropriate health and safety measures. So at the beginning of the project, we did have to do some remedial removal of debris. But there was also another unfortunate discovery of mold on the backs of one of the panels, which we had to address immediately. Here's a basic outline describing our various treatment steps. I'm going to quickly go through some of these visuals that will help to summarize the procedure we used, but hopefully some of you can see in this detail, that's what compression cracks look like. This is an extreme example, but that's how they manifest when you roll a painting paint side face in. Because so much material remained adhered to the backs of the panels, each one was incredibly heavy and stiff. So humidification had to be performed in order to gently relax the panels so they could be safely taken off the tubes and then properly re-rolled. This was achieved by constructing a humidity chamber and then slowly raising the humidity to approximately 85% over a period of 24 hours. We had many helping hands throughout this project, including a number of interns from the conservation program at the University of Delaware. So initial steps involved removing the old facing paper, which you might be able to make out on the left-hand side, and cleaning the surface of the painting and stabilizing any tears and flaking paint. A rolling elevated bridge was also constructed to allow us to treat each of the panels on the floor without the need to continually walk across the canvas. You see my husband here, he's varnishing the painting using the bridge. And that bridge, although it was very useful, it was definitely tough on everyone's backs, but back and neck pain is part of the job when you deal with large murals. In the upper right photo, you can get a sense, again, of those compression cracks in the paint. But what we ended up doing is toning these with stable reversible conservation paints, so they were not as noticeable when viewed from below. The backs of the panels also required some attention. We had to stabilize more splits and tears in the secondary canvases that were glued to the back. And we had to remove bits of mortar by gently sanding down proud areas of wall cement. This was to avoid any Princess and the Pea type issues that might occur when the panels were ultimately going to be adhered to solid supports. I already mentioned the enormous weight of these panels, so this eliminated the possibility of mounting them onto stretchers. Stretching them was just not a feasible option. So we had no choice really but to, like I said, adhere them to solid supports in the end. And then we had the added challenge of being faced with adhering them to a curved wall. Amanda already mentioned the round barn where the mural currently resides, and here you can see the architect's specs for it on the upper left, and then on the right is a schematic prepared by Staging Dimensions. They were instrumental in installing the mural and preparing those solid supports. So recall that the mural was originally on a flat wall. We knew that this would cause hidden areas of delamination between the two canvases to become more pronounced, something that we had to prepare for during the installation process. We also were originally hoping to adhere them to fiberglass panels, but this was ultimately overruled, another story, and we were suddenly faced with adhering them to plexiglass. For the record, almost nothing sticks to plexiglass, okay? So the adhesive we would need would have to not only stick to plexiglass, it would need to be able to hold up 1,000 pounds, be mold resistant, remain stable in a fluctuating environment, and finally be able to stick to oil paint, canvas, and bits of wall cement. Right. All right, we were blessed with a fantastic crew during installation. We had people, experts flown in for 1 week period, that's all we had, who helped to carry out this monumental effort. Folks who were both from the museum sector, but also the private sector. Some of these professionals were themselves veterans in the mural world, involved with installing John Singer Sargent's magnificent murals in the Boston Public Library, as well as dealing with the 80-foot tall murals at the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum. So we were in good company there. Back to that adhesive. So we corresponded with technicians at 3M's headquarters in Minneapolis. So 3M, the very same company that makes all of our Scotch tape, we talked with them for months, and they sent us multiple samples of some of their adhesives for testing. And of course, the one that worked the best had to be one of their most expensive, and it was only made in France, and we had to order large quantities of this stuff. And finally, it also had a set time of about 60 minutes, so we had to work extremely fast before that adhesive dried. No room for error. We were able to successfully set down a number of bulges in areas exhibiting planar deformations using sandbags wrapped in pillowcases. The sandbags were allowed to rest on the surface of each section overnight while the adhesive was allowed to completely set. After an exhausting week, the mural was finally up. There are still a handful of bulges and minor wrinkles, something that is, of course, a direct result of moving this canvas from a flat wall to a curved one. The seams are also now visible, and the outer edges remained unframed. This decision was made by Jamie Wyeth, as he feels it is an honest depiction of the complex journey that this mural has been through. The story behind the Apotheosis mural in some ways is a harbinger of what other notable murals are likely facing today. Tomorrow's session will be covering the impending fate of some of the New Deal era murals, issues that may involve complicated deinstallation procedures and long-term storage considerations. If and when some of these murals require deinstallation, there will undoubtedly be challenging decisions that will need to be made, very similar to those faced by our team throughout this project. But perhaps the story of this mural can also offer some hope. I do encourage you all to make the trek to Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, to experience the mural in its new home, as it is truly a miracle that the Apotheosis has been given a new lease on life. And I have so many people to thank. This is our install team that I have pictured here. But I want to specifically say thank you to my husband, who is not here, obviously. He suffered with me thick and thin for 3 years. Also, my mentor and colleague, Dr. Joyce Hill-Stoner. She was there with us in spirit throughout this 3-year project as well. Thank you so much. And now on to questions and then the reception.
Take questions. If there are questions, also don't want to stand in the way of wine.
Great. Thank you. Great. Is that on? Great panel, great presentations. I am a fellow PhD in American art from the University of Delaware, and the secondary expert in American illustration. So wonderful to hear all of this. 2 things I would say, and that is, number one, and I know about the illustration market. Spielberg and Lucas were the ones that drove the prices up, number one. Number two, for Norman Rockwell, they duped each other out in certain auctions. Number two, I worked for a leading American art dealer, Ira Spanierman, and he was selling N.C. Wyeth's. I remember he had one in around 2001 for $800,000. So Wyeth's prices, I think for at least the last 30 years, have been relatively high, depending on what the theme is. And then the other thing I'll say is you are heroic. You and your husband and the team are heroic. I can't imagine how, given the Winter Tour program and Joyce Stoner, how that initial or the last removal was botched like that. Did they not use anyone from Winter Tour? Maybe you don't want to say.
No, okay. Well, you can actually, without doing too much digging, find out a little bit about the original deinstallation online. So I'll let you do the digging there. But I will tell you that Joyce was consulted during that time, and I think a whole variety of things happened, as I touched upon. There were a lot of unexpected discoveries. I think some assumptions were made by that crew that turned out to be, they learned that they bit off more than they could chew. I'm certainly glad that I was a wee grad student at that time and not involved in that project. They did consult with Joyce, but I think when things got a little dicey, they had to do what they had to do. And she, was involved to a point, and then, but was aware that they were rolled paint side face in and on very small tubes. She definitely will talk to you about that.
Well, and the other part of that is there was huge time pressure. From the time the building was sold, it was hoped that they could be retained in that building, or B, that an institution would take them over. And they did go to the Delaware Historical Society, who had hoped that they might be able to raise funds for conservation and an installation. And then 2008 happened. And what we know now, the extreme expense that they were predicting in 2008 was even a fraction of what it really cost to do the work. So they did remain in storage. Brandywine was consulted, a lot of places, a lot of different museums, but nobody has space for a 60-foot mural.
What do you think accounts for the surge of interest in collecting illustration? Thanks for sharing the information on prices, but I'm really curious. What do people think they're buying? What particular subjects? And what do you think has shifted in the art market?
It's an interesting question. I think there are a lot of factors. I think one of the things, as I mentioned in the presentation, is just the accessibility and the resonance that these images still have. A lot of people feel a sense of nostalgia. These are very much of Golden Age illustrations, like positive imagery. It's a little bit wholesome. And I think, especially in our current moment, when things feel a little bit more stressful or a little more chaotic than they have in previous years, it is just like, it's like a shining beacon of hope in a way. Like it makes you smile and it makes you feel good, and it has that immediacy. So that's what I hear a lot of people say when they come and look at our collection or when they're in one of our booths. It just makes people happy, honestly, but that's a simplistic answer. But I do think that there is a certain clientele of people that collect illustration, like Spielberg, like Lucas, Guillermo del Toro. A lot of people in Hollywood are drawn to this type of artwork because it has a cinematic quality, and there is a certain level of celebrity influence that's happening in our current moment. There is a Jack White, the musician of the White Stripes, he posted a picture standing in front of a Rockwell last year, talking about how he got a new cell phone for his 50th birthday. And the comment section of that post, he didn't mention anything about the Rockwell in the background, but the comments were like, "What? Let's talk about that Rockwell. Like, we don't care about your phone. Let's talk about that Rockwell in the background." So, it's getting some buzz. From celebrity clientele too.
And I would add that despite these prices we're talking about, that's still on the low end. If you want to begin to, I always talk about Aviva's art within reach. When there's art within reach and people feel they can enter the market, it's accessible subject matter, but then, price wise, it doesn't have to be the $500,000 one, right?
Just to add to that, even if a Rockwell oil painting is out of reach, there's a whole market for preparatory studies. I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes, but I have a lot of people come to our gallery seeking this as an entry point into collecting the big names, these studies. And we see that with Leyendecker as well. There was a Leyendecker study sold at auction last year for I think like $80,000. So there's a lot of appetite for that kind of work.
Okay, quick two-part question. Would it have been easier for you to reinstall it as a flat wall? And what influenced your choice of the diameter, the circumference of the curved wall that you ended up using?
So those, the architect was given the dimensions of, he knew full well the dimensions of the mural, and we discussed with him, the bare minimum that we would like in terms of the curvature of the wall. And he ran a lot of, I'm not a techie by any means, quite the opposite. So he ran some programs with his crew, and we were able to kind of get a sense of what might work and what wouldn't. But no matter what, there are still air pockets that you wouldn't be able to see if it's flat. Between the two canvases, there's just nothing that anybody can do. But I mean, there is. We could go in and actually improve some of the appearance. But like I said, Jamie's decided to sort of tells a story, and he's decided to keep the seams. They look quite raw and jagged. We could also cover them up and paint them just like NC did. But it's had a lifetime to tell. And what was did I answer? Okay.
And I was just going to say, I have wondered the same thing about the building size and scope. So one day while I was down there, I pasted off, and across the diameter is 60 feet. And I was like, 60 feet across, a 60-foot mural on a curve. It just felt like it was more aesthetically, chosen by magic numbers than a number that, decreased the torque on the something, or, yeah.
I mean, it's on plexiglass. It's not moving ever. It is on those plexiglass panels. You can take the plexiglass panels off individually and move them out if you wanted to, but it is on there. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, well, keep those mural points in mind for tomorrow, too.
Okay, everybody, a couple of comments. First of all, please, for those of you who are joining tomorrow, I hope that's all of you, we will start promptly at 9:15. There will be breakfast and coffee from 8:30. Erin? 8:45, and then we start at 9:15. And we are now going to have a reception and viewing. But we've been asked, please, to move to the far gallery since the chairs in here need to be taken up. So please move down there, and any questions can be answered later. And we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Warmest thanks for a really great day.